In Section 4, I will explain the thinking of Kennan and Kissinger's key figures of realism during the Cold Wars. George Kennan advocated a policy of containment against Soviet expansion at the beginning of the Cold War. Kennan drew the attention of the American Truman administration in February 1946 with the so-called long telegram. While working at the embassy in Moscow, Kennan sent a long telegram to Secretary of State James Burns. This telegram outlined a new approach to dealing with the Soviet Union. Next, Kennan, in 1947, published an article titled The Sources of Soviet Conduct, anonymously under the name Mr. X, in the July issue of Foreign Affairs, published the so-called X article. In April 1947, Kennan became the first director of the Policy Planning Staff, an internal think tank of the State Department. Kennan criticized the legal and moral approaches in foreign policy in the X article. Kennan wrote the following: in any case, the significant damage inflicted in the past, or there is no delusion more dangerous than the concept of total victory that threatens to deliver a significant blow in the future. Finally, he advocated for a policy of containment against it. In such a situation, the main elements of America's policy towards the Soviet Union are the long-term, expansionist tendencies of Russia, expansionist tendencies. Patient but vigilant. It is clear that it must be containment. Henry Kissinger served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford from September 1973 to January 1977. Kissinger criticized the tradition of idealistic liberalism in American foreign policy. Kissinger criticized Wilson's idealism as follows: for 20 years, American leaders, driven by Wilsonian idealism, have passionately played a global role. However, in the late 1960s, America was at a stalemate in Indochina. Because it was torn apart by domestic conflicts, it required more complex and subtle definitions for international activities. From 1947 to the 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union fought the Cold War, with each being the leader of its respective bloc. However, in the 1960s, the relationship between the Soviet Union and China deteriorated mainly due to territorial issues. At the same time, the United States, because of the stalemate in the Vietnam War, it was suffering. During the Cold War era, due to the prevalent view of the world order as a bipolar confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, the United States could not find a way to escape from it. From 1947 to the 1950s, it was a tense period of the US-Soviet Cold War, and the Soviet Union and China were almost united. They opposed the capitalist bloc led by America as a monolithic entity. However, after the mid-1960s, as détente between the United States and the Soviet Union advanced, the ideological conflict and border disputes between the United States and China prolonged. And in this situation, the Nixon diplomacy led by Kissinger emerged, focusing on US-China. By establishing diplomatic relations, they aimed to divide the communist bloc. In other words, Kissinger prioritized the power balance of realpolitik over the ideological conflict of US-Soviet capitalism versus communism. He pursued the balance of power. In 1972, Secretary of State Kissinger promoted Richard Nixon's visit to China in 1972. Afterwards, Kissinger spoke about Nixon's visit to China in the following way. As a result of the Shanghai Communique and the diplomacy that produced it, the Nixon administration, although somewhat principled, the administration was able to realize what it called an international structure of peace. America and China, as soon as the restoration of diplomatic relations with international economy, the form of relationships changed dramatically. Lastly, let's summarize the 4 key points of realism. First, nation-states and sovereign states are the main elements of international politics. Actors are entities that perform actions, and the international system generally means a system composed of various states. Second, regarding the nation, it is seen as an entity that faces the outside world as a unified unit. This is a model of monistic diplomacy. And thirdly, the state is essential, are considered rational actors. In short, It is assumed that policymakers in each country will make decisions on foreign policy through a process that is as rational as possible.
Fourth, the most important issue for international politics is national security. That also concerns military security.
Is facilitated.
Among the various international issues, the military-related events should be handled by the highest decision-makers of the state in high-level history, high-level politics. While it is regarded as high politics, economic and social events are generally considered less important, entrusted to practitioners at a lower level.
It is regarded as low politics.